My name is Hattie, 68 years old, and I never thought I'd be telling a story about how my own son betrayed me. For 40 years, I poured my heart into our family home, raising James with all the love a mother could give. But everything changed when he locked me in our basement during what was supposed to be his tropical vacation. Little did he know, I still had one card to play. When life hands you lemons, sometimes you sell the whole lemon tree. I want to know where you're watching from today. And if you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button before I tell you how I turned the tables on the ultimate family betrayal. I've lived in my two-story colonial-style house in the suburbs of Boston for 40 years. My husband Arthur and I bought it when we were young newlyweds with dreams of filling it with children and laughter. We ended up having only one child, our son James, but that house became the center of our world. Every corner holds a memory, from the height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe to the small dent in the living room wall from when James was learning to ride his skateboard indoors against my explicit instructions. Arthur passed away 15 years ago after a brutal battle with pancreatic cancer. I still remember his final days in our bedroom upstairs, how the sunlight would stream through the windows in the afternoon, creating a warm glow that seemed to ease his pain, if only for moments. After he was gone, I channeled my grief into maintaining our home exactly as he would have wanted it, pristine gardens and all. I taught third grade at Lincoln Elementary for 35 years before retiring. Teaching was more than a job for me, it was a calling. I loved watching young minds develop and grow, much like I had done with James. My retirement 6 years ago gave me time to finally pursue my own interests, gardening, baking, and volunteering at the local animal shelter. I created a peaceful life for myself despite the loneliness that occasionally crept in. James is now 42, married to Melanie for the past 11 years. They live across town in a sleek, modern house that never felt like a home to me. Too cold, too perfect, like something from a magazine spread rather than a place where real life happens. But I kept those thoughts to myself, wanting to support my son's choices. When James was growing up, he was a sweet, thoughtful boy. He would bring me wildflowers he picked on his way home from school and leave little notes in my lunch bag when I went to work. As he grew older, I watched him develop into a responsible young man with a quick mind and a kind heart, much like his father. But something shifted after he met Melanie during his last year of college. Melanie came from money, old money, as they say. Her family had expectation standards that seemed impossibly high to me. From the moment I met her, I sensed her discomfort around me, like my simple lifestyle was something she had to tolerate rather than embrace. She would make small comments, subtle digs about the outdated decor in my home or how I still used physical cookbooks instead of fancy kitchen gadgets. At first, I brushed these moments aside, telling myself she was just young and adjusting to having a mother-in-law. But as years passed, her behavior didn't improve. If anything, it grew worse, especially after they married. James began to change too. He called less frequently, made excuses to cut our visits short, and often seemed distracted when we did spend time together. I noticed how he would look to Melanie before answering my questions, as if seeking her approval. The first time they suggested I might be happier in a retirement community, James was helping me replace some light bulbs. I nearly fell off the stepladder in shock. "Mom, we just think it might be easier for you," he said, not meeting my eyes. "These big old houses require so much maintenance. Wouldn't you like to be around people your own age?" "My own age, James. I'm 68, not 98, I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "This is my home. I'm perfectly capable of living here." Melanie, who had been silently scrolling through her phone, looked up. "The real estate market is really hot right now, Hattie. You could make a small fortune selling this place." The way she eyed my living room made me feel like she was already mentally redecorating it, or worse, calculating its value. James quickly changed the subject, but that conversation planted a seed of unease that grew with each visit. They brought up the topic of me moving at least once a month after that, each time more insistent than the last. Still, I tried to maintain our relationship. I invited them for Sunday dinners, sent thoughtful gifts on birthdays and anniversaries, and always made myself available to help when needed. I wanted so desperately to reconnect with my son, to understand what had changed. Sometimes I caught glimpses of the old James, like when he would laugh at an inside joke we shared, or when he would fix something around the house without being asked, just like his father used to do. For Melanie's birthday last year, I spent weeks knitting her a beautiful cashmere scarf in her favorite color. When she opened it, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, homemade. How quaint," she said quickly, setting it aside to show off the diamond bracelet James had given her. James didn't even notice the hurt on my face, too busy basking in his wife's approval. Later that night, I found the scarf stuffed in their coat closet as they were preparing to leave. I never mentioned it, just like I never mentioned seeing them exchange looks when I told stories about James as a child or how they would check their watches repeatedly during our visits. Despite everything, I held on to hope that things would improve. After all, family is family, and James was all I had left. I kept telling myself that all relationships go through rough patches and that eventually we would find our way back to each other. I never imagined how far from me he had already drifted or what he was capable of doing to the mother who had given him everything. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in May. I was in the garden planting the tomato seedlings I had been nurturing on my kitchen windowsill. Spring had finally arrived in Massachusetts after a particularly brutal winter, and I was eager to get my hands in the warm soil again. "Mom, hey, I've got some news," James said when I answered my cell phone, sounding more animated than he had in months. "Good news, I hope," I said, cradling the phone against my shoulder as I continued working. "Great news, actually. Melanie and I are going to the Bahamas for 2 weeks. Her parents gave us the trip as an anniversary gift." "That sounds wonderful, honey," I said, genuinely happy for them. "When do you leave?" "This Friday," he replied. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. Would you mind house-sitting for us? Our dog walker had a family emergency, and we really need someone to take care of Baxter." Baxter was their 3-year-old golden retriever, a sweet boy who always greeted me with enthusiastic affection, unlike his owners. I adored that dog, and the thought of spending 2 weeks with him lifted my spirits immediately. "Of course I'll watch him," I said. "You know I love that furry boy." "Great. Also, could you stay at our place? Baxter gets anxious in unfamiliar environments." I hesitated. Their ultra-modern home made me uncomfortable with its stark white furniture and minimalist decor that seemed to highlight every fingerprint. But this was the first time in years that James had asked for my help, and it felt like an opportunity to strengthen our bond. "Actually," I began, "why don't I take Baxter to my house? He's stayed with me before and he seemed comfortable." There was a pause. Then James cleared his throat. "Well, we were thinking it might be easier if you just stayed at our place. Our security system is complicated and the lawn service needs access to the backyard." Something in his tone struck me as odd, but I pushed the feeling aside. "All right, if you think that's best." "Perfect. Oh, and Mom, do you think you could stop by our house on Thursday? We have some instructions we want to go over before we leave." "Of course," I agreed, feeling a small spark of hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new chapter for us. In the days leading up to their trip, I prepared a small care package for them: sunscreen, homemade cookies for the plane, and a new novel I thought Melanie might enjoy. I also picked up a few groceries to stock their fridge, knowing they'd be busy packing. When Thursday arrived, I dressed carefully in a light blue blouse that Arthur always said brought out the color of my eyes and drove to their house with the care package and groceries. As I pulled into their circular driveway, I noticed James pacing on the front porch phone, pressed to his ear, his face pinched with worry. He waved distractedly as I approached, turning away to continue his conversation. I caught fragments as I passed. "No, that won't work. We need more time. I understand the pressure, but—" Inside, Melanie was frantically organizing a stack of documents on the dining table. She jumped when I entered, quickly gathering the papers into a folder. "Hattie, you're early," she said, her voice unnaturally high. "Only by 10 minutes?" I replied, setting down my bags. "Is everything all right?" James seemed stressed. "Just last-minute travel anxiety," she said dismissively. "Let me show you where we keep Baxter's food and medication." As she led me through their house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. They were both acting strangely jumpy and distracted. James finally came inside, ending his call with a terse, "We'll figure it out when we get back." During dinner, a tension-filled takeout meal from an upscale Italian restaurant, James broached a subject that took me by surprise. "Mom, I've been meaning to talk to you about the house," he said, pushing his pasta around his plate. "Your house?" I asked, confused. "No, your house. It needs a lot of work. The roof is getting old, and those large trees are a hazard during storms. It's a lot of maintenance for someone your age. There it was again, the implication that I was too old to manage on my own. I set down my fork. James, we've had this conversation. My house is in fine condition. I had the roof inspected just last year. Melanie interjected. Property values in your neighborhood are at an all-time high, Hattie. It's actually the perfect time to sell. I'm not interested in selling my home, I said firmly. It's where I raised my family. It's where your father and I built our life together. James sighed. Mom, I'm just concerned about you. What if you fall on those steep basement stairs? What if there's a fire? You're all alone there. I'm alone, not incapable, I retorted, feeling my frustration rise. And if you're so worried about me being alone, maybe you could visit more than once a month. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Finally, I offered, if you're concerned about maintenance costs, I'd be happy to help financially. I know you mentioned some investment troubles last Christmas. James's face hardened. We don't need your money, Mom. We're doing fine, Melanie added quickly, though something in her expression made me doubt her words. After that, the conversation shifted to safer topics, their trip itinerary and Baxter's schedule. As they showed me around one last time, reviewing alarm codes and watering instructions for Melanie's numerous houseplants, I noticed a document that had slipped under the edge of the sofa. When neither of them was looking, I discreetly retrieved it, thinking it might be important for their trip. Later, after they'd gone upstairs to finish packing, I glanced at the paper and felt my blood run cold. It was a bank notice showing several overdue mortgage payments and threatening foreclosure. The amount owed was staggering. Why hadn't James told me they were in such financial trouble? I would have helped in a heartbeat. I returned the notice to where I'd found it, my mind racing. Their sudden interest in the value of my home took on a sinister new meaning, but I couldn't bring myself to believe James would try to pressure me to sell my home for his benefit. Not my son, not Arthur's boy. The next morning, they left in a flurry of activity, barely sparing me a proper goodbye. Melanie handed me a typed schedule for Baxter and a list of emergency contacts. The basement has a dehumidifier that needs to be checked daily, she mentioned as they were heading out the door. Just make sure the reservoir isn't full. James gave me a quick, distracted hug. Thanks, Mom. We really appreciate this. As their taxi pulled away, I stood in the doorway with Baxter at my side, trying to ignore the unease that had settled in my stomach. Little did I know that checking that dehumidifier would change the course of my life forever. That first evening alone with Baxter was pleasant enough. We went for a long walk around their upscale neighborhood, had dinner together, and then settled on the couch. Baxter's head in my lap as I watched my favorite mystery show. Around 9 o'clock, I remembered the dehumidifier. Baxter followed me to the basement door, but whined and backed away when I opened it. What's wrong, boy? Don't like the basement? I patted his head reassuringly. I'll just be a minute. The light switch at the top of the stairs illuminated only the first few steps, leaving the basement itself in shadow. I carefully made my way down, finding another switch at the bottom that brightened the spacious area. The basement was finished with polished concrete floors and white walls, primarily used for storage from what I could see. I located the dehumidifier in the far corner and was checking its reservoir when I heard a sound that made my heart stop. The door at the top of the stairs had slammed shut. Baxter immediately began barking and scratching from the other side. It's okay, Baxter, I called, hurrying back to the stairs. The door must have caught a draft. But when I reached the top and turned the knob, it wouldn't budge. I twisted harder, then pushed and pulled, but the door remained firmly shut. That's when I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. A brand new deadbolt lock had been installed, the kind that required a key from either side. I was locked in. My first reaction was disbelief. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Surely the door had just jammed, or I wasn't turning the handle correctly. I tried again, jiggling the knob, pushing with my shoulder, even calling out to Baxter as if he could somehow help. Baxter, go get help! Go on, boy! I shouted, knowing it was futile. Baxter wasn't Lassie, he was just a confused pet, wondering why I was behind a door, barking and whining in response to my distress. As the reality of my situation began to sink in, panic rose in my chest like a tidal wave. I pounded on the door, screaming for help until my throat was raw. But James and Melanie's house sat on a large lot, the nearest neighbor a good 100 yards away. No one would hear me. Help! Someone, please help me! I cried anyway, desperation fueling my voice. My fists became sore from pounding on the solid wood door, and tears streamed down my face. The basement suddenly felt like it was closing in around me, the walls drawing closer with each panicked breath. I forced myself to stop to breathe deeply. Panic wouldn't help me now. I needed to think clearly to assess my situation. Looking around the basement more carefully, I took inventory of my surroundings. Besides the main storage area, there was a small half-bathroom, thankfully, with a functioning toilet and sink. In another corner sat an old mini-fridge humming quietly. Next to it, a metal shelving unit held cardboard boxes labeled winter clothes and holiday decor. A folding cot leaned against one wall, the kind used for overnight guests, with a rolled-up sleeping bag beside it. Something about these items, arranged almost too perfectly, sent another chill through me. This wasn't random storage. This looked like preparation. I made my way to the mini fridge and opened it, finding it stocked with bottled water, sandwich materials, apples, and a few microwave meals. A small microwave sat on a shelf above it, plugged in and ready to use. In the cabinets nearby, I found paper plates, plastic utensils, and more non-perishable food items, enough to last about 2 weeks. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was no accident. Someone had prepared for me to be here, locked away. And the only people who knew I would be checking the dehumidifier were James and Melanie. No, it couldn't be. My own son wouldn't do this to me. There had to be another explanation. I reached for my cell phone only to find I had no signal in the basement. The concrete walls were too thick. I searched frantically for a landline but found nothing. I was completely cut off. The small window near the ceiling was my next hope, but it was barely large enough for my arm to fit through and reinforced with security bars. Even if I could somehow remove them, I would never fit through the opening. I spent hours searching every inch of the basement, looking for another way out, a weakness in the walls, anything. But the construction was solid, the basement secure. I was well and truly trapped. As exhaustion finally overtook me, I set up the folding cot and laid down, pulling the sleeping bag around me for comfort more than warmth. The reality of my situation kept sleep at bay. My own son had imprisoned me in his basement. The mortgage notice, the questions about my house, it all made a terrible kind of sense now. They were in financial trouble, desperate enough to lock me away while they tried to gain control of my house, declared me missing or incompetent. The possibilities were too awful to contemplate. As tears soaked my makeshift pillow, Baxter's occasional whines from upstairs were my only connection to the outside world. I felt betrayed in a way I couldn't have imagined possible. This pain went beyond anything I'd experienced, even the loss of Arthur. My husband had been taken by cancer, a cruel disease, but not a cruel choice. This was deliberate. My child, the baby I had nursed and raised and loved unconditionally, had locked me away like an inconvenient problem. The next morning I woke stiff and disoriented. For a brief, blessed moment, I thought I was at home in my own bed. Then, the harsh reality came flooding back as I took in the concrete walls and dim lighting of the basement. I sat up, wincing at the pain in my back from the uncomfortable cot. Baxter was no longer at the door, though I could occasionally hear the click of his nails on the hardwood floor above. Days began to blend together. I established a routine to maintain my sanity, exercising by walking laps around the basement, rationing my food carefully, and talking out loud to myself or to Baxter when I heard him nearby. I kept track of time by making marks on a cardboard box, one for each day. On what I estimated was the 4th day, I made a discovery that rekindled my hope. While pushing the shelving unit to see if there might be another exit hidden behind it, I noticed something in the far corner. An old landline telephone jack, the kind that had become increasingly rare in homes as everyone switched to cell phones. My heart began to race. If that jack was still connected, if there was a phone somewhere in this basement, I tore through the storage boxes with renewed energy, and in the 3rd one, buried under Christmas decorations, I found an old corded telephone. With trembling hands, I connected it to the jack, lifting the receiver to my ear with a prayer on my lips. The dial tone was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The dial tone, humming in my ear, felt like a lifeline being thrown to a drowning woman. My fingers trembled as I considered who to call. My first instinct was 911, but I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the numbers. What would I say? Hello, my son has locked me in his basement. How could I report James, my only child, to the police? What if there was some explanation I hadn't considered? And the shame of it all, admitting to a stranger that my own flesh and blood had done this to me, was almost too much to bear. Instead, I dialed Martha, my neighbor of 30 years. Martha lived in the house next to mine, a spirited 70-year-old widow who had been my rock after Arthur died. If anyone would help without judgment, it would be her. The phone rang 4 times before her familiar voice answered. Hello. Martha, I said, my voice cracking. It's Hattie. Hattie, I thought you were house-sitting for James. Is everything all right? You sound upset. The concern in her voice broke something in me, and tears began to flow. No, everything is not all right. I'm locked in James's basement. I need help. There was a moment of stunned silence. You're what Hattie is, some kind of joke. Between sobs, I explained my situation, how James and Melanie had guided me to check the basement dehumidifier and how I'd found myself locked in with supplies that suggested this was no accident. Dear God, Martha breathed. Have you called the police? No, I admitted. I just can't bring myself to report James. He's my son, Martha. There has to be some explanation. Martha's voice turned firm. Hattie, listen to me. I'm coming right now. I'll bring my son's toolbox. We'll get you out of there. Thank you, I whispered, relief washing over me. The address is 47 Beacon Hill Drive. I know where it is. Sit tight, I'll be there as fast as I can. True to her word, Martha arrived within the hour. I heard her car pull up, then the sound of the front door opening after she presumably found the spare key I'd told her about, hidden in a fake rock near the porch. Hattie, her voice called through the house. I'm down here, I shouted, pounding on the door. In the basement. Baxter's excited barking joined the commotion as Martha's footsteps approached the basement door. There's a key lock on this side, she called. I can see it's a new installation. Do you know where they might keep the key? No idea, I replied. Check the kitchen drawers maybe, or James's home office. I heard Martha rummaging around upstairs, opening and closing drawers. After what seemed like an eternity, she returned. No key that I can find. I'm going to try picking the lock. My Frank taught me a thing or two before he passed. It took nearly 30 minutes of Martha working on the lock, punctuated by colorful cursing that would have made me laugh under different circumstances. Finally, I heard a triumphant, "Got it," and the blessed sound of the lock turning. The door swung open, and there stood Martha, her silver hair disheveled, holding a small screwdriver and a hairpin. Baxter bounded down the stairs, nearly knocking me over with his enthusiastic greeting. Oh, Hattie, Martha said, her eyes filling with tears as she took in my disheveled appearance. I must have looked a fright after almost 5 days in the basement. She hurried down the steps and embraced me tightly. I can't believe this. We need to call the police right now. No, I said firmly, clinging to her. Not yet. I need to understand why. Why would he do this to me? Martha led me upstairs to the kitchen where she made me sit while she prepared tea. I stroked Baxter's golden head, drawing comfort from his unconditional affection. Hattie, Martha began, carefully setting a steaming mug before me. There's something you should know. James has been asking around the neighborhood about your house, about property values. I stared at her. What do you mean? About a month ago, he came by asking if I knew what the Henderson place down the street sold for. Said he was just curious about the market. But then Gladys from the garden club mentioned he'd asked her the same thing. And Stan said James inquired about zoning laws, whether the area might be rezoned for multifamily units. My hands tightened around the warm mug. They've been trying to get me to move to a retirement community for months now. Martha nodded grimly. There's more. I didn't want to worry you, but I've heard rumors about James. Frank Jr., my son, plays poker with some fellows from James's office. He mentioned that James has a gambling problem. Apparently he's in deep with some unsavory characters. The bank notice I'd found suddenly made horrible sense. James wasn't just in financial trouble, he was desperate. Desperate enough to lock away his own mother while he... What? Tried to gain power of attorney, forged my signature on documents, reported me missing and presumed dead. I should have seen it coming. I whispered, the pain of betrayal cutting deep. They've been hinting about me selling the house for over a year now. James knows the house is paid off, that it's worth a small fortune in today's market. What are you going to do? Martha asked gently. I sat in silence for a long moment, stroking Baxter's fur as I considered my options. The house was in my name only. After Arthur died, we'd made sure everything was properly transferred to me. James had no legal right to sell it or make decisions about it, unless I was declared incompetent or dead. A cold realization settled in my stomach. That's what this was about. They would return from their vacation to find me gone, report me missing, and after an appropriate amount of time have me declared dead. With no will specifying otherwise, James would inherit everything as my only child. Martha, I said slowly, a plan forming in my mind, do you still use Sarah Thompson as your lawyer? Martha nodded, her eyes widening as she began to understand. You're not thinking, I'm not just thinking it, I'm going to do it. If James wants my house so badly, he can have what's left after I sell it. Hattie, that's your home of 40 years. It was my home, I corrected her, a steely resolve replacing my earlier despair. Now, it's just a house one that my son was willing to imprison me for. I won't let him get away with this, but I won't send him to jail either. He's still my son, no matter what he's done. Martha looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. What's your plan? First, I need to call Sarah. Then I need a real estate agent, the best and fastest one in town. James and Melanie will be gone for 9 more days. That's all the time I have to sell my house and disappear, at least as far as they're concerned. As Martha reached for her phone, a kind of calm determination settled over me. James had underestimated me, treated me as nothing more than an obstacle to his financial salvation. He was about to discover that his mother was made of sterner stuff than he realized. The next morning found me sitting across from Diana Winters in the sleek conference room of Boston Elite Realty. Diana, a sharp-dressed woman in her 50s with a reputation for closing deals at record speed, listened intently as I explained my situation, or at least a carefully edited version of it. So you need to sell quickly due to an unexpected opportunity abroad, she clarified, making notes on her tablet. I nodded, the lie tasting bitter but necessary. My sister in Arizona needs me to move in with her immediately due to health issues. No need to mention I had no sister nor any plans to move to Arizona. And you're looking for an as-is sale, no contingencies, fastest possible closing. Exactly. Price is important, of course, but speed is my priority. Diana's perfectly manicured nails tapped thoughtfully on the glass table. Your property on Maple Avenue is in a highly desirable area, Mrs. Griffin. Colonial-style homes in that neighborhood rarely come on the market. Even with an accelerated timeline, I believe we can secure an excellent price. How quickly can we move? I asked, conscious of the limited time I had before James and Melanie returned. We can have your home photographed today, listed by tomorrow morning. With your permission, I'd like to market it as a rare opportunity requiring immediate decision. That will attract serious buyers who can move quickly. She smiled confidently. In this market, especially for a property like yours, I wouldn't be surprised if we had offers within 24 hours. Relief washed over me. That sounds perfect. Before meeting with Diana, I had spent the morning with Sarah Thompson James and Melanie's next-door neighbor, Martha's attorney, ensuring that everything I planned was legal. As the sole owner of my property, I had every right to sell it without consulting anyone. Sarah had drawn up a limited power of attorney authorizing Diana to handle the closing in my absence if necessary, another precaution in case James somehow discovered what was happening and tried to intervene. True to her word, Diana arranged for a photographer to meet me at my house that afternoon. I spent the morning in a whirlwind of activity, quickly tidying up and removing personal items that might distract potential buyers. The photographer worked efficiently, capturing the charm of my beloved home from the hand-carved banister Arthur had restored to the bay window in the living room where I'd spent countless hours reading. As I moved from room to room, memories flooded back. James taking his first steps across this very floor. Arthur and I dancing in the kitchen late at night after a rare evening out. Family holidays, quiet Sunday mornings, the ordinary moments that make up a life. Each corner held pieces of my heart, and for a moment, I faltered. Was I really going to sell the home that contained 40 years of my life, the last physical connection I had to Arthur. All because of one terrible act of betrayal. I sank onto the window seat in James's old bedroom. Now, a guest room decorated in soothing blues and grays. On the bookshelf stood a photo I'd forgotten about James at his college graduation. His arm around me, both of us beaming with pride and hope for his future. I picked it up, tracing his face with my fingertip. "What happened to you?" I whispered, tears threatening. "When did money become more important than family?" The photographer's voice calling from downstairs broke my reverie. "Mrs. Griffin, I'm finished with the main floor and exterior. Just need the upstairs bathrooms now." "Coming," I called back, carefully replacing the photo. I wiped away a tear and straightened my shoulders. No, I would not be swayed by nostalgia. My son had made his choice when he turned that key in the lock. Now, I was making mine. The next morning, Diana called with excitement in her voice. "Hattie, your listing just went live 2 hours ago, and I already have 3 showing requests. One is from Westbrook Development. They're very interested." By that evening, I had 5 offers to consider. Diana walked me through each one, highlighting the pros and cons. The highest offer came from Westbrook Development, a company known for buying older homes in desirable neighborhoods, tearing them down, and building luxury modern homes to sell at premium prices. "They're offering $50,000 above asking price, all cash with closing in 7 days," Diana explained. "No inspections, no contingencies. It's an exceptional offer, Hattie. And they plan to tear down the house." I asked, a strange sense of satisfaction mingling with the inevitable sadness. "Yes, that's their business model. They'll likely demolish it within weeks of closing and begin construction on a new home immediately. The market for new construction in your area is extremely strong." It seemed fitting somehow. If I couldn't keep my home, if my own son valued it only for its monetary worth, then perhaps it was better that it ceased to exist altogether. Let James inherit an empty lot, rather than profit from the home I had lovingly maintained for decades. "I'll take Westbrook's offer." I decided. "Let's move forward as quickly as possible." Diana smiled. "Excellent choice. I'll contact their representative right away. If all goes well, we could close by next Wednesday." Wednesday? I calculated mentally. James and Melanie were due back the following Friday. It would be tight, but doable. They would return to find not only that I was no longer trapped in their basement, but that the home they coveted had been sold and demolished. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, legal consultations, and practical arrangements. I rented a small furnished apartment in downtown Boston, paid 3 months in advance with cash from my savings. I hired a moving company to pack and transport my most treasured possessions, the items I couldn't bear to part with, family heirlooms, Arthur's favorite chair photo albums, and a few pieces of art we had collected together over the years. For James, I carefully set aside some items from his childhood, his baseball trophies, the quilt my mother had made for him, photos of him with his father. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to deprive him of these connections to his past. I arranged for these to be stored in a small unit rented under Martha's name, accessible to James when the dust settled. As for Baxter, I couldn't in good conscience leave him alone until James and Melanie returned, nor did I want the sweet dog to witness the demolition of his home. I arranged for him to stay at Pampered Paws, an upscale boarding facility, leaving a note for the staff that his owners would collect him upon their return from vacation. I paid for 2 weeks in advance, including extra for special treats and playtime. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, I grappled with conflicting emotions. There were moments of doubt when I questioned whether I was overreacting, whether there might be some explanation for what James had done. But each time I remembered the carefully stocked basement, the new deadbolt lock, the financial documents I'd seen. This was no misunderstanding. There were also moments of grief so profound they took my breath away. I was losing my home, and in a very real sense, my son. No matter what happened after James discovered what I'd done, our relationship would never be the same. The trust was irrevocably broken. But beneath the pain and doubt, a new emotion was taking root, a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. For too long, I had allowed James and Melanie to make me feel diminished, less capable because of my age. I had accepted their subtle condescension, their dismissal of my independence, all in the name of maintaining peace. Now I was taking control of my own life, making decisions based not on what would please my son, but on what would protect me and my future. The day before closing, I walked through my empty house one last time. The rooms echoed with my footsteps, stripped now of the furniture and decorations that had made it a home. I moved from room to room, saying a silent goodbye to each space, honoring the memories it held. In the kitchen, I placed a letter on the counter addressed to James. It was not an angry letter, though I had every right to be angry. Instead, it was a straightforward account of what had happened and why I had made the decisions I had. I explained that I had kept some money from the sale for him, but that it would be held in trust, conditional on him getting help for his gambling addiction and financial problems. I told him I loved him, that I always would, but that love didn't mean allowing yourself to be harmed by those who should protect you. As I locked the door for the final time, I felt a complex mixture of sadness, resolve, and surprisingly hope. The house had been my past. Now, I needed to create my future one where I was valued, not for what I owned, but for who I was. The demolition was scheduled to begin the day after closing, a swift timeline, even by development company standards. Westbrook was eager to break ground on their new construction before winter weather could cause delays. I had signed the closing documents on Wednesday, the money was safely deposited in my account, and by Thursday morning, the demolition crew had arrived at what was no longer my home. I couldn't bring myself to watch in person. Instead, Martha drove me past the property late Thursday afternoon after the crew had finished for the day. Where my beautiful colonial had stood that morning, there was now only a partially demolished structure. The entire east wing, including the kitchen and dining room, was gone, reduced to a pile of lumber and debris. The rest would follow the next day. "Are you okay?" Martha asked gently, reaching across the car seat to squeeze my hand. I stared at the ruins of 40 years of memories, feeling strangely detached. "Yes, I think I am. It's just a house now." "What will you do when James returns and discovers what's happened?" "I'll face him," I said simply. "Not immediately, he'll need time to process his anger, but eventually we'll talk. He's still my son, Martha, despite everything." "You're a better woman than I am," she muttered. "I'd have reported him to the police and let him rot in jail." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps my refusal to involve law enforcement was a final act of maternal protection, misguided as it might be. Or perhaps it was simply that the public humiliation of such an arrest would have hurt me as much as it hurt James. Either way, I had chosen a different path, one that protected me while still leaving the door open, however slightly, for reconciliation. My new apartment in downtown Boston could not have been more different from my suburban home. The sleek, modern, one-bedroom unit on the 12th floor of a recently renovated building offered panoramic views of the city skyline. The furnishings were contemporary, nothing like the antiques and family pieces that had filled my previous home. It was a blank slate, a place with no history or emotional attachments. I spent the next several days settling in, arranging the few treasured items I had brought with me, familiarizing myself with the neighborhood. The building had a small but well-maintained garden on the roof, which quickly became my favorite spot. I would sit there in the early mornings with my coffee, watching the city come alive beneath me, planning my new life, one small step at a time. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after I had escaped from James's basement, I received a text from Martha. "They're back. Earlier than expected. You should see this." Attached was a video clearly shot from Martha's upstairs window with her phone. It showed James and Melanie standing on the empty lot where our home had once stood, their posture radiating shock. Even from a distance, their body language told the story, James pacing frantically, gesturing wildly. Melanie standing frozen hands covering her mouth. I felt a twinge of satisfaction, I admit, but it was quickly replaced by sadness. In that moment, James wasn't the man who had locked me in a basement. He was my little boy facing the consequences of a terrible mistake. I almost called him then, almost offered comfort as I had so many times throughout his life when he'd faced disappointment or loss. But I stopped myself. This was a lesson he needed to learn without my intervention. Later that day, my phone began ringing incessantly, James's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The messages started angry and accusatory, then shifted to confused and finally desperate. "Mom, where are you? What happened to the house? Please call me." "I don't understand what's going on. The neighbors said you sold the house. That's not possible." "Mom, please, I need to talk to you. Whatever you think happened, I can explain." I listened to each one, my heart aching, but I didn't call back. Not yet. The next morning, I asked Martha to meet James at the empty lot. She would give him the key to the storage unit containing his childhood mementos and the letter I had left. It was time for the full truth to come out. Around noon, Martha called. "It's done. I gave him the key and the letter. He read it right there, sitting on what used to be your front steps. Melanie was screaming about lawyers and fraud, but he just sat there reading, getting paler by the minute. When he finished, he told her to shut up, that they deserved this. Then he asked where you were." "What did you tell him?" "I said you were safe and that when you were ready, you'd contact him. But I warned him that might not be for a very long time." Martha paused. "He was crying when I left Hattie. Really crying." I thanked her and hung up, my own tears flowing freely now. Despite everything, it hurt to know my son was in pain, even pain of his own making. 2 days later, I agreed to meet James at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near my new apartment. I arrived early, choosing a table in the back with a clear view of the door. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. In just over a week, he seemed to have aged years. His eyes were red-rimmed with dark circles beneath them, his clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them. He spotted me and froze for a moment, his expression a complex mixture of shame, relief, and uncertainty. Then he approached slowly, as if afraid I might flee if he moved too quickly. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking on that single syllable. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down, James." He sank into the seat, his eyes never leaving my face. "I don't even know what to say. I'm sorry seems completely inadequate." "Why?" I asked simply. "I need to understand why you would do such a thing to me." He looked down at his hands, which were trembling slightly. "I've made so many mistakes. The gambling started small, just poker games with friends. But it grew, and before I knew it, I was in deep. I kept thinking the next bet would turn things around, that I'd win big and fix everything. But it just got worse. And Melanie. She didn't know at first. When she found out, she was furious. We were about to lose the house, our savings were gone. She said the only way to fix it was to sell your house, that you were getting older anyway, that you'd be better off in assisted living. So you decided to lock me in your basement while you were supposedly on vacation. How exactly was that going to get you my house?" James swallowed hard. "We never went to the Bahamas. We were staying with Melanie's parents, laying groundwork for having you declared mentally incompetent. We were going to come back, find you confused and living in squalor, claim you'd had some kind of breakdown." His voice was barely audible now. "The plan was to petition for guardianship, then sell the house to pay for your care in a facility. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. You were going to have me committed based on a situation you created your own mother. I know how it sounds. It sounds monstrous because it was monstrous. I was desperate and terrified and not thinking clearly. But, Mom, you have to believe me, I never intended for you to be hurt. The basement was comfortable. There was food, water, a bathroom." "As if that makes imprisoning me acceptable," I asked incredulously. "I raised you better than this, James. Your father would be heartbroken." At the mention of his father, James broke down completely. I know, there's no excuse, no justification. I betrayed everything you and Dad taught me." I watched him weep, this grown man who had once been the center of my world. A part of me wanted to reach across the table to comfort him as I had when he was small. But another part, the part that had been locked away and forced to reconsider everything I thought I knew about my son, held back. "What happens now?" he asked finally, wiping his eyes with a napkin. "That depends on you. I've kept some of the money from the sale of the house. It's in a trust, enough to pay off your gambling debts and start fresh. But there are conditions. You need professional help both for the gambling and for the choices you've made. And you need to make amends not just to me, but in your life overall. And Melanie," I shrugged, "that's between you and her. But I will say this, a partner who encourages you to harm others to solve your problems is not a partner worth keeping." He nodded slowly. "She left yesterday after I refused to sue you for selling the house. Said I was weak, that I should fight for what was rightfully mine. Nothing was rightfully yours, James. Not yet. Not until I decided to give it to you, or until I passed away naturally. That's something you and Melanie never seemed to understand." We talked for another hour, painful but necessary conversation. James didn't ask for forgiveness, which was good because I wasn't ready to offer it. But he did ask for a chance to prove he could change to rebuild some kind of relationship. I told him it would take time, a lot of time, and consistent evidence that he was addressing his issues. As we prepared to leave, he asked hesitantly, "Can I at least know where you're living now?" I smiled sadly. "Not yet. I need space and time, James. I need to know that I'm safe and that my wishes will be respected. For now, we can meet occasionally in public places like this. Maybe someday, if things improve, that will change." He accepted this with a nod, though the pain in his eyes was evident. As we stood to leave, he said quietly, "You know what's ironic? All those times we tried to convince you to downsize, to move somewhere more manageable, you always said you weren't ready to leave your home. And now you've done exactly that, but on your own terms. That's the difference, James. It was my choice, not something forced upon me. We all need to feel in control of our own lives at any age." As I watched him walk away, shoulders slumped under the weight of his mistakes, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, grief for what we had lost, cautious hope for what might be salvaged, and pride in my own resilience. That was 6 months ago. Today, my life looks completely different than it did for the previous 4 decades, and in ways I never could have imagined, it's better. My downtown apartment has become a true home, filled with both treasured mementos from my past and new items that reflect this chapter of my life. The rooftop garden is now my domain, the building management having asked me to oversee its care after noticing my daily attention to the plants there. I've made new friends, other residents in my building, and people I've met through the senior center 4 blocks away where I volunteer teaching art to children twice a week. At 68, I've discovered I'm far from done learning and growing. I've taken cooking classes, joined a book club, and even tried yoga, though my knees protest certain poses. Martha visits, often delighting in my new urban lifestyle and dragging me to trendy restaurants she reads about in Boston Magazine. Who would have thought we'd become city girls in our golden years? She laughed during her last visit as we sipped wine at a rooftop bar overlooking the harbor. As for James, we are slowly, cautiously rebuilding some semblance of a relationship. He enrolled in a gambling addiction program the week after our cafe meeting and has been attending therapy consistently. 3 months ago, he moved to a small apartment across town, having sold his house to pay off the remaining debts that the trust I established didn't cover. Melanie filed for divorce shortly after moving out, citing irreconcilable differences. James didn't contest it. We meet once a month for lunch, neutral territory, where we carefully navigate our new reality. Our conversations are different now, more honest but also more guarded. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust him again, but I'm open to the possibility that he can change, that he can become someone worthy of trust once more. Last week, he brought Baxter to our lunch, knowing how much I'd missed the sweet dog. Watching James with Baxter gentle and attentive, I caught glimpses of the son I remembered, the boy with his father's kind heart. It gave me hope, however cautious. The empty lot where my house once stood remains vacant, the development company having run into zoning issues that delayed their construction plans. Sometimes, I drive by Martha at the wheel since I sold my car and look at the bare earth where my life was centered for so long. But I feel no regret, no longing to return. That chapter has closed. What I've learned through this ordeal is that home isn't about walls and floors and a particular address. Home is where you are valued, respected, and free to make your own choices. For years, I clung to my house because I thought it was my last connection to Arthur, to the life we'd built together. But Arthur isn't in that plot of land. He's in my heart, in my memories, and in the values I live by, including the strength to stand up for myself when those values are violated. I also learned that age is no barrier to beginning anew. At 68, I started over, created a different life than the one I'd known for decades. It wasn't easy. There were days of doubt and loneliness, moments when I questioned every decision. But with each small step forward, each new experience embraced, I built confidence in my path. As for forgiveness, that's a journey still in progress. I haven't forgiven James, not completely, but I've found that holding on to anger serves no purpose. Instead, I've chosen to focus on protecting myself while leaving room for the possibility of healing. True forgiveness, I believe, can only come when trust is rebuilt and trust is earned through actions, not words, over time. The most profound lesson, though, is about self worth. For too long, I allowed James and Melanie's dismissive attitude toward me, their subtle implications that I was becoming a burden, to erode my sense of value. I dimmed my own light, made myself smaller to avoid conflict, to maintain a relationship that was increasingly one sided. Never again. Today, I stand in my truth, a woman who has weathered betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more authentically herself. The home I've created isn't defined by its square footage or market value, but by the freedom and peace it represents. And that, more than any physical structure, is worth fighting for. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who weren't treating you with the respect you deserve? Or had to make the difficult choice between keeping the peace and honoring your own worth? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you navigated those challenging waters. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to my channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned the hard way. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve and create the life you want to live.